Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, yeah, of course. So the way that I teach, yeah, is called content-based learning. Yeah.
へえ、
And this is actually from a technique that was developed by a professor from that I watched over, I think in like 2006, like
へえ、
over 5 or 6 years ago that I
お
watched
ー、
him.
うん、うん、
And he has this concept of content-based learning that I really liked and I
うん。
started adopting into my classes because I found that it
わお。
was the most like
う
effective
ん。
way of doing
おー、
it.
うん。
Yeah.
わあ、sounds cool. うん。
Thank you. And basically, the way that it works is I was getting a lot of students that on paper they were learning English or Spanish,
う
and
ん。
you could give them tests and they would
あ
know
あ、
absolutely everything about
へえ。
pronouns and
あ
adjectives,
あ、へ
syntax,
え。
grammar.
わあ、interesting.
Yeah.
う
And they
ん。
could pass their tests.
う
Like
ん。
if you were to give them a test, they would pass it.
へえ。
However, when I tried to have a conversation with them, like
う
just a casual
ん。
conversation, I
Yeah,
would get this look of like, oh my God.
you're
And so,
right. Yes.
right?
う
And
ん。
I mean, it does not, for me, it is not useful for you to know everything about the language, like
Yeah.
adjectives, pronouns, to
う
tell me
ん。
that this is past preterite. If
う
you're not able
ん。
to hold a conversation, I would rather
Yeah,
you're able to hold a conversation.
indeed.
Yeah.
うん。
So essentially, there's three parts of this.
へ
Yeah.
え。うん。
And the first part is just critical thinking skills. So that's the first
へ
thing
え。
that we see.
う
Yeah.
ん。うん。
So I have my students learn that whenever we're reading anything, whenever we're
うん。
watching a video, whenever we're
うん。
listening to a conversation,
うん。
reading an essay, or
うん。
analyzing a book,
う
we
ん。
should ask like a specific number of questions.
あ
Yeah.
あ。うんう
So,
んう
for
ん。
example, is the speaker being specific?
うん。
Yeah.
うん。
People know what they're talking about when they are
あ
being
あ。
specific.
Yes.
They
あ
should be able to say who, what, where, when, how many, how often.
あ。ああ。
Yeah.
うん。
And we should be able to question this, whether they're able to provide all the information that we need in order for us to believe them. So that's our first step, right? Being
Yeah.
able to be
うん。
critical thinkers.
うん。critical thinkers. Yeah. うん。
Yeah. And
うん。
be aware that anything can change at any moment.
う
Yeah,
ん。
because if we want to grow as a person, not only in our language, but just as a society, we need
Yeah.
to be open to change
う
our
ん。
minds and
う
to change
ん。
our minds constantly because the world changes and we have to
Yeah.
change with the world, right?
Yeah. うん。
So we have to be aware of this, that our opinion can change at any moment and the
う
opinion
ん。
of another person could change
お
at any moment
う
if
ん。
we are provided with the right information,
へ
right?
え。Yeah, right. うん。
Perfect.
う
And
ん。
so my first rule is that we don't have to know all the answers.
う
Yeah.
ん。う
But we
ん。
should know all the questions and not
あ
be afraid to ask them.
あ。ああ、OK。う
Yeah.
ん。わあ。
So this is the second part. After we have our critical
うん。
thinking skills,
うん。
we go ahead and we start reading books. We start
お
watching TED Talks. We start reading the news.
へえ。
We start
う
just
ん。
talking to people.
う
Yeah, we
ん。
don't use textbooks. We
あ
use whatever
あ。
is happening around
へ
us,
え。
like in the world.
わあ。
Yeah.
うん。あ
And so
あ。
what that does, it
うん。
helps us create an atmosphere where conversation is possible, right?
ああ。Yeah, right. わあ。very new to me.
Yeah.
うん。
Exactly. So this is an atmosphere where they feel safe to say everything, right?
うんうん。
Um, and so most of the students are just so like involved on what is going on with the content. Like
う
they're
ん。
so involved, they're like, oh my God, I can't believe that this is happening. Or have you read this? Or do you
あ
see what she's saying? Or
うん。
the percentage that she's providing,
あ
right?
あ。う
And so they're
ん。
not even aware that they're acquiring the language
うん。
because the main thing is let's talk. Let's
あ
see what
あ。
this person wrote.
お
Let's
お。
compare notes,
うん。
right? So
right. Yeah.
in that way,
うん。
we're learning, we're reading these things and we're
うん。
digesting new words and new ways
う
of
ん。
like saying it, but we
う
don't
ん。
realize because we're so involved in the conversation,
ああ。わあ、cool.
right?
Sounds so interesting. うん。
and that opens up like a forum for conversation where people are allowed to make mistakes but also
うん。
question the mistakes.
ああ。へ
So if
え。
So if somebody says something that is probably not the smartest thing or something that is questionable, including me, right? Because these classes are one-on-one, right? If I say something that's questionable, you should feel free to question that idea.
Yes.
Right? You should be able to say like, okay, give me an answer to this, right? Give me specifics. Tell me what, when, where, and how. Right? And it is our responsibility, right? To ask questions that don't make like to question ideas that don't make sense to us. Right? And the professor that I told you about, Roberto, believes that it's even like an ethical responsibility. Because if you leave a bad idea unchecked, it can damage people, right?
Yeah.
So it's better to stop it at the beginning.
At
right?
the beginning. Okay.
And then finally we get this third stage of learning where it's the area of reading and writing.
Wow.
Right? And then again, we have to remind ourselves that making mistakes is not bad, right?
And that's very important.
Exactly. And it even has a name. It's called developmental errors, right? So if you want to learn a language, you have to be willing to make mistakes, which is what stops most of my students, because they're so afraid of making mistakes, they won't even begin their speaking, right?
Yeah, you are right. That's a big problem.
Exactly. So they'll be afraid to speak, and then they won't be able to make mistakes, and therefore they won't be able to correct them. Right?
Right.
So what I want is to create an atmosphere in the classroom where the students feel completely comfortable to say whatever they want to say, however they want to say it.
Very idealistic. Nice.
Right? Yeah. And sometimes I'll get a couple of students that are just like, no, I can't do it. I can't do English. I can't do Spanish. Right? But those are the same students that eventually, when we're like reading about something that they're really passionate about, or we're in the middle of a conversation and they really want to take part in this conversation, that's sorry.
Yeah, it's okay.
That's the moment when the magic words come in, which is como digo, or how do I say this word, right? And that's the magic that happens. We start getting this sense of, oh, I'm allowed to make questions, right? And I tell, like, maybe sometimes I get a little embarrassed and I say, no, go on, right? And then they ask me sometimes, like, can I say something half in Spanish or half in English? And I say, you want to use Spanglish? Use Spanglish, but tell us what you think, right? And so that makes them realize they can make mistakes. Nobody's going to judge them, and nobody's going to get a better or great or worse like outcome, because this is part of the language acquisition process.
Yeah, indeed. Wow.
Right? So those are the 3 stages that I use, and that is basically how I choose to teach. And it's called content-based learning, and I feel that it's the most effective. Of course, this is when we have already a basis of whatever language we're learning, right? I mean, of course, at first we're going to have to learn the pronunciation, the alphabet, some of the basic like grammar rules. It's possible to not do it.
Okay.
Right?
Wow, so interested.
But once you get to that point where you have like you're at least like a B1 or B2, then you're able to take this new approach to learning, which I feel helps us a lot more. And not a lot of people agree with this way, or like they like to go to more traditional ways. This is the way that I have found that works best for me and for my students.
I see. Wow.